Strait of Hormuz. International Transit Lane Charlie South. 2:51 p.m. The atmosphere is heavy, suffocating. The air temperature hovers at 112 degrees Fahrenheit, but the humidity off the Persian Gulf pushes the heat index well past 130. It is a wet, oppressive blanket that coats everything in a layer of salt and sweat. The water is unusually calm, a flat, shimmering sheet of mercury stretching to the horizon. But this calmness is a deception. Beneath the surface and on the radar screens of the world's most powerful warships, the environment is chaotic. Steaming westward at a standard patrol speed of 15 knots are two gray Leviathans of the United States Navy. The lead ship is the USS Philippine Sea, CG-58, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser. She is old, battle-hardened, and bristling with 122 vertical launch cells. She is the shotgun, the primary air defense commander for the region. Her SPY-1B radar panels, flat gray octagons mounted on her superstructure, are pumping megawatts of electromagnetic energy into the sky, tracking every bird, every drone, and every commercial airliner within 200 miles. Flanking her to the starboard is the USS Spruance, DDG-111, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, newer, faster, and equipped with the latest baselines of the Aegis combat system. Together, they represent roughly $4 billion of American military hardware and 700 American lives. They are conducting a presence operation, a simple visual reminder to the region that the United States Navy guarantees the free flow of commerce. But at 2:51 p.m., the presence operation turned into a crisis that nearly ignited World War III. Combat bridge. We have multiple surface contacts breaking out of the haze. Bearing 02 nil relative. Range, closing fast. They are not following standard traffic separation schemes. Captain Marcus Iron Stone, the commanding officer of the Philippine Sea, stepped out of his command chair. He didn't need to look at the large tactical display to know what was happening. He could feel the vibration of the ship's engines as the helm automatically adjusted for the threat. He walked to the bridge wing and raised his binoculars. What he saw would have terrified a lesser sailor. Emerging from the coastline of Larak Island, moving in a massive, coordinated phalanx, was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, IRGCN. But this wasn't the usual harassment patrol. This wasn't 3 or 4 fiberglass speedboats buzzing the wake. This was an armada. 35 Ashura-class fast attack craft, heavily armed with 177mm rocket pods and heavy machine guns. 12 Bavar-class patrol boats, carrying sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles. And in the center of the formation, looming like a fortress, was the Makran, a massive converted oil tanker turned into a sea base. Its deck was crowded with helicopters, fast boats, and missile launchers. They were pushing directly into the path of the American ships. They were violating the rules of the road on a massive scale. The radio on the Philippine Sea erupted with a voice that was screaming, distorted by static and anger. American warships, CPS 58 and 111. You are entering the exclusion zone of the Islamic Revolution. This area is closed for naval exercises. Turn your heading to 180 immediately. If you do not turn, we will push you into the sea. This is your final warning. It was a setup. There was no exclusion zone. There was no scheduled exercise. Tehran was trying to physically force the U.S. Navy to change course. They wanted the visual. They wanted the video footage of 2 massive American warships turning away, fleeing from the Iranian swarm. They wanted to show the world that they controlled the strait. Captain Stone looked at the swarm, now less than 4 miles away and closing at 40 knots. He looked at the Makran, its missile rails elevating. He picked up the secure handset connecting him to the Spruance and the 5th Fleet Command in Bahrain. His voice was calm, almost monotone. All stations, this is Philippine Sea. We are being challenged by a battalion-sized force. I have 48 hostile contacts closing. Intent appears to be aggressive maneuvering and ramming. I am not altering course. Set general quarters, spin up the birds, man the rail. Tehran believed they had checkmated the Americans. They believed the U.S. rules of engagement were too restrictive, that the Americans would never fire first in such a crowded waterway. They believed they could bully the superpowers with sheer mass and audacity. They were wrong. What happened in the next 42 minutes was the most violent, precise, and technologically devastating reversal of fortune in naval history. It was the moment the swarm tactic died. This is the story of the afternoon Iran tried to push the U.S. Navy and found out that the U.S. Navy doesn't move. Let's rewind 12 hours. Tehran, the bunker of the Supreme National Security Council, 2 a.m. The air in the room was recycled and stale. The walls were covered in digital maps of the Persian Gulf. General Hossein Salami, the head of the IRGC, was outlining Operation Straitjacket. The regime was in trouble. The currency was in freefall, trading at 600,000 rials to the dollar. Protests in the Kurdish regions were spreading to the capital. The leadership needed a win. They needed an external enemy to rally the population. The Americans are weak, Salami argued, pointing to the map. They are distracted by politics at home. They are risk-averse. If we challenge them with overwhelming numbers, if we surround them, they will panic, they will turn away. And when they turn, we will have the footage. We will broadcast it on every channel. The great Satan flees. The plan was designed to be below the threshold. They wouldn't fire missiles initially. They would use shouldering tactics, driving their boats dangerously close, forcing the American captains to maneuver to avoid collision. They would herd the American ships out of the shipping lane and into Iranian territorial waters, where they could be legally seized or humiliated. They assembled the fleet under the cover of a darkness. They loaded live ammunition. They briefed the boat captains. Be aggressive. Touch their hulls if you have to. Make them fear you. At 2 p.m., the order was given. Execute. The swarm surged out of the coves. They felt invincible. They outnumbered the Americans 50-2. But Iran made 3 catastrophic mistakes. First, they fundamentally underestimated the capabilities of the USS Philippine Sea. They saw an old ship. The Philippine Sea was commissioned in the late 1980s. They thought its systems were dated. They didn't know that the ship had just completed a modernization period in Norfolk. Second, they ignored the hunter in the deep. The Iranian plan relied on the surface. They looked at the satellite photos and saw only the 2 surface ships. They assumed the water beneath them was empty. They were fatally wrong. Shadowing the Philippine Sea, running ultra-quiet at 300 feet, was the USS Annapolis, SSN 760, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine. The Annapolis wasn't just observing. It was carrying a special payload, the Mk-48 80 Cap Mod 7 torpedoes, programmed with a new software update specifically designed for surface action group targeting. The submarine had been tracking the Makran, the Iranian sea base, since it left port. The captain of the Annapolis had a firing solution locked in 4 hours ago. Iran thought the battle was 50 versus 2. In reality, the most dangerous player on the board was one they couldn't even see. Third, and this was the mistake that would cost them an entire fleet, they miscalculated the red line. The Iranian strategy was based on the assumption that the U.S. Navy would prioritize de-escalation. They didn't know that the President of the United States had issued a classified execute order, exord, regarding the Makran. The Makran had been identified as a launch platform for terrorism. Intelligence indicated it was carrying drones destined for proxy groups in Yemen and Lebanon. The exord was simple. If the Makran or its escorts engage in hostile action against U.S. forces, the threat is to be neutralized. Do not warn. Do not hesitate. Dismantle the capability. Tehran thought they were playing a game of chicken. They didn't realize the American captains had already been given permission to crash the car. 2:53 p.m. The merge. The distance closes to 2,000 yards. The 35 Ashura speedboats break formation. They accelerate to 45 knots, bouncing violently over the waves. They split into 2 groups, pincer movement style, aiming for the flanks of the Philippine Sea. On the bridge, the tension is palpable. The closest point of approach, CPA alarms are screaming. Captain, lead vessels are within 1,000 yards. Weapons trained on us. Captain Stone grabs the tactical microphone. This is the captain. Batteries release, warning shots, 5-inch gun. Put a shell across their bow, wake them up. The forward Mk-45 gun on the Philippine Sea swivels. Crack! A single 5-inch shell screams out, landing 200 yards in front of the lead Iranian boat. A massive column of water erupts. The Iranian boat doesn't slow down. It fires a burst of 12.7mm machine gun fire at the cruiser's bridge. Bullets ping off the armored glass. That was the trigger. That was the hostile act. Captain Stone didn't blink. They are shooting. All stations, weapons free. Defend the ship. Clear the surface. The 42 minutes of destruction had begun. Strait of Hormuz. 2:54 p.m. The sound of machine gun bullets impacting the steel hull of a cruiser is distinct. A sharp, metallic hail that signifies the end of diplomacy and the beginning of violence. On the USS Philippine Sea, the transition from patrol to combat took less than 4 seconds. Vampire! Vampire! Visual on rocket launch! The lookout screamed. From the lead pack of Iranian Ashura speedboats, white smoke trails erupted. They were firing 107mm unguided rockets. These are crude weapons, basically flying artillery shells, but at close range they can shred radar arrays and kill sailors on the deck. Captain Stone's voice was ice cold over the 1MC ship-wide address system. Engage! 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 The response was not proportional. It was overwhelming. The buzzsaws wake up. The Philippine Sea and the Spruance are equipped with the Mk-38 Mod 3 25-meter chain gun systems. These are not manually aimed weapons where a sailor hopes to hit a bouncing target. These are stabilized, optronic-guided predators. The gunners in the Combat Information Center, CIC, looked at their screens. The optical sensors locked onto the heat signatures of the Iranian boat engines. Track 101, locked. Track 102, locked. Firing. The sound of the 25mm cannons is a rhythmic, heavy bass beat. The rounds are high-explosive incendiary tracer, HEIT. The lead Iranian boat, the one that had fired the machine gun, was the first to die. A burst of 5 rounds walked up the hull. The first round shattered the fiberglass bow. The second and third punched into the fuel storage. The fourth detonated the ammunition on board. The boat didn't sink. It ceased to exist. It disintegrated in a flash of orange and black, throwing debris 100 feet into the air. But there were 34 more boats. They were swarming, weaving, trying to get inside the minimum range of the big guns. Close-in weapon system, CIWS to surface mode, the tactical action officer ordered. The Phalanx CIWS, usually used for shooting down missiles, has a surface mode. It spins its 20mm Gatling gun barrels at 4,500 rounds per minute. The sound is like canvas tearing. A solid stream of tungsten armor-piercing rounds slashed across the water. It cut the second and third Iranian boats in half. They simply fell apart, the water around them churning white with the impacts. The Iranian wolf pack tactic relies on overwhelming the enemy with too many targets, but the Aegis system can track over 100 targets simultaneously. It doesn't get overwhelmed, it gets efficient. 2:58 p.m., the missile exchange. Seeing his speedboats being massacred, the Iranian commander on the Makran Sea base panicked. The shouldering plan was dead. This was a war. Launch the anti-ship missiles. Fire the Noor batteries. From the decks of the 12 Bavar-class patrol boats in the Makran itself, the heavy weapons came out. Smoke and fire erupted as 16 Noor anti-ship cruise missiles left their rails. These are sea-skimming missiles, traveling at Mach 0. 9 carrying a 360-pound warhead. Multiple Vampires inbound, bearing 040. Range 6 miles. This is the nightmare scenario, a saturation attack at point-blank range. Captain Stone didn't flinch. Auto Special, SM-2s and ESSMs. Empty the forward cells. The vertical launch system, VLS, on the Philippine Sea is a marvel of engineering. In rapid succession, the cell hatches flipped open. The bridge was bathed in smoke and fire as the standard missiles, SM-2, and evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, ESSM, roared into the sky. The ESSM is designed for this exact moment. It is hyper-maneuverable. It can pull 50 Gs. It can turn 180 degrees in seconds. The sky over the Strait of Hormuz turned into a fireworks display of lethal geometry. Intercept 1, a Noor missile targeting the Spruance, was hit head-on by an ESSM 2 miles out. The explosion shook the clouds. Intercept 2, 3, 4. The SM-2s found their targets. Orange flashes blossomed against the blue sky. Debris rained down into the ocean. 15 missiles were destroyed. But one made it through. The 16th missile, fired from a hidden angle on the Makran, jinked low. The radar clutter from the waves masked it. It was heading straight for the Spruance. Vampire leaker, brace for impact. The Spruance fired its Nulka decoys, hovering rockets that broadcast a fake radar signal to seduce the missile away. The Iranian missile took the bait. It veered sharply to the left, chasing the ghost signal, and exploded harmlessly 500 yards off the destroyer's port beam. The shockwave rattled the ship, knocking items off shelves, but the hull was intact. No damage. Systems green, the Spruance reported. Now the gloves were off. The Iranians had fired heavy ordnance. Captain Stone picked up the radio. Authorize Strike Package Alpha. Target the Makran. Target the patrol boats. Sink them all. 3:05 p.m., the helicopters joined the fight. While the surface ships traded fire, the air support arrived. Launched minutes earlier from the decks of the destroyers, 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters had been hovering low, masking their signatures behind the curvature of the Earth. Now they popped up. Hellfire logic engaged. Laser on. The MH-60R carries the AGM-114 Hellfire missile. It is a precision instrument. The pilots targeted the Bavar-class missile boats that were trying to reload. Rifle. The missiles slid off the rails. They didn't aim for the hull. They aimed for the bridge. The first patrol boat lost its entire command structure. The boat went into a hard spin, rudder jammed, engines screaming. The second boat took a hit to the missile storage. The secondary explosion was catastrophic. It split the boat in two. The pilots were methodical. Target destroyed. Shifting to next. The Iranian fleet was losing coordination. Their radio chatter was a cacophony of screams and confusion. They are everywhere. We cannot see them. Where's the Air Force? They were calling for help that would never come. 3:12 p.m. The submarine strikes. The Makran Sea Base was the center of gravity. It was the command ship. It was the symbol of Iranian power. It was massive, 800 feet long. Too big for a single Hellfire, but not too big for the USS Annapolis. Deep below the chaotic surface, the submarine commander watched the acoustic display. He could hear the explosions above. Final bearing on target Sierra 1, range 4,000 yards. Tube 1 and 2, firing point procedures. Match geographics. Shoot. 2, Mach 48. 80 cap torpedoes were ejected from the tubes. These are the most advanced underwater weapons in existence. They are wire-guided, intelligent, and carry a warhead capable of breaking a destroyer's back. The Macron never saw them. It has no sonar. It has no torpedo defenses. It is a converted oil tanker, a soft target playing at being a warship. The torpedoes ran at 55 knots. The first torpedo passed under the keel of the Macron amidships. It detected the magnetic anomaly of the massive steel hull. Detonate. The explosion didn't happen against the hull. It happened underneath it. A massive bubble of expanding gas lifted the 40,000-ton ship out of the water. The steel keel, stressed beyond its limit, snapped with a sound like a gunshot that could be heard for miles. The ship broke in half. The second torpedo hit the stern, destroying the propellers and the engine room. The pride of the IRGC Navy was dead in the water, burning, broken, and sinking. The thousands of gallons of aviation fuel stored on deck for the helicopters ignited. A mushroom cloud of black smoke rose into the atmosphere, visible from Dubai. Part 3, Strait of Hormuz. 3:50 p.m. The battle had been raging for 24 minutes. The Iranian fleet was in tatters. The flagship Macron was a broken, burning ruin, its bow and stern sections pointing skyward like a tombstone. The water around it was thick with burning oil and debris. Of the 35 fast attack boats, 20 were destroyed. The surviving 15 were scattered, their formations broken, their captains realizing that swarming a U.S. cruiser is a suicide pact. But the fight wasn't over. Tehran, watching the disaster unfold on remote feeds, made a desperate gamble. They couldn't lose face. They couldn't let the Americans win this easily. Launch the drones. Launch the Air Force. From the coastal air bases at Bandar Abbas and Keshem, the response was scrambled. 4 F-4 Phantom fighter jets, ancient American-made relics from the 1970s, but upgraded with Chinese avionics, took off. Simultaneously, a wave of Ababil 5 suicide drones launched from truck-mounted rails along the coast. Their target, the bridge of the USS Philippine Sea. They wanted a mission kill. They wanted to blind the Aegis radar. 3:18 p.m., the air war. Combat, this is air defense, new contacts, multiple vampires and bogies inbound, bearing 350. Low altitude. Captain Stone looked at the display. The situation was escalating. The surface threat was neutralized, but the air threat was saturation level. Spruance, this is Philippine Sea. Take the drones. I will take the jets. This is the power of the joint engagement zone. The ships divide the labor. The USS Spruance engaged its 5-inch gun in airburst mode. The gun fired special fragmentation shells into the path of the incoming drone swarm. The shells didn't hit the drones directly. They exploded in front of them, creating a cloud of tungsten shrapnel. The Ababil drones flew into the cloud. Their delicate propellers were shredded. Their wings were perforated. It was like flying a flock of pigeons into a blender. 6 drones dropped out of the sky instantly. The remaining 4 were engaged by the ESSM missiles. Boom, 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 clean sweeps. But the F-4 Phantoms were the real threat. They were carrying Maverick missiles. They were fast, supersonic. Birds inbound, range 20 miles. Captain Stone prepared to fire his long-range SM-2 missiles, but he didn't have to. Philippine Sea, this is Outlaw 1-1. Flight of 2 F-35C Lightnings checking in. We see your party. Mind if we cut in? High above, at 30,000 feet, stealth had arrived. 2 F-35Cs from the USS Abraham Lincoln, operating in the North Arabian Sea, had been vectoring in since the first distress call. They were invisible to the Iranian radars. The Iranian F-4 pilots were looking at their screens, trying to lock onto the ship. They didn't see the doom above them. Outlaw 1-1, Fox 3. The F-35s didn't even turn on their radars. They used data from the Philippine Sea to target the jets. They fired AIM-120D AMRAAM missiles. The missiles dropped from the internal bays, ignited, and streaked downward at Mach 4. The Iranian pilots never got a warning until the terminal phase. Lock, lock, eject, eject. The lead F-4 exploded in midair. The missile tore the wing off. The second F-4 tried to dive. The AMRAAM followed it, pulling 30 Gs. Flash. 2 fireballs in the sky. The remaining 2 F-4s saw their wingmen vanish. They didn't push their luck. They banked hard, dumping their external fuel tanks, and fled back to Iranian airspace. Air superiority established. 3:25 p.m., the directed energy. Surprise. The major threats were gone, but one persistent Bavar-class missile boat was still hiding in the wreckage of the Macron, using the burning hulk as cover. It popped out, firing a shoulder-launched missile at the Philippine Sea. It missed, but it was annoying. Captain Stone turned to his tactical action officer. Test the Odin. The USS Philippine Sea was one of the few ships equipped with the Odin, optical dazzling interdictor Navy system, a high-powered laser. Odin is charged, target acquired. This wasn't a movie laser. It was invisible, silent. The beam focused on the Bavar boat's optical sensors and the bridge crew. The effect was instantaneous. The sensors on the boat fried. The crew on the bridge were blinded by the dazzle effect, disoriented, unable to see controls. The boat went into a hard turn, out of control. Target neutralized via soft kill. Gun, finish it. The 25mm chain gun barked one last time. The boat exploded. 3:30 p.m., the Mop-up. The shooting began to taper off. The sea was a scene of total devastation. The Macron had slipped beneath the waves, leaving only a massive oil slick and bobbing debris. The surviving Iranian speedboats were fleeing, their wakes streaking white toward the coast. They weren't fighting anymore. They were running for their lives. Captain Stone ordered, "Check fire. Do not engage retreating forces. We are not murderers. We are professionals." The Philippine Sea and Spruance moved through the debris field. Launch the RHIBs, search and rescue. Again, the paradox of American power. The same sailors who had just unleashed hell were now deploying rescue swimmers to save the men who had tried to kill them. They pulled 40 Iranian sailors from the water. Many were burned. Many were in shock. They were brought aboard the Spruance, treated in the medical bay, and given water. They sat on the deck, wrapped in blankets, looking at the gray steel of the destroyer that had destroyed their fleet. They looked at the American flag snapping in the wind. They realized the lie they had been told. They had been told the Americans were soft. They had been told the Americans would run. Instead, they had been broken against a wall of technology and resolve. 3:33 p.m. The message from command. The secure teleprinter on the bridge chattered. A message from CENTCOM commander. "Good shooting." Status report. Captain Stone typed the reply. "Engagement complete. Force protection successful. No U.S. casualties. No damage to us units. IRGCN force neutralized. Resuming patrol. Out." He looked out at the horizon. The sun was still beating down. The heat was still oppressive. But the Strait of Hormuz was open. The commercial tanker traffic, which had paused miles back, began to move again. The spice must flow. Strait of Hormuz. 4 p.m. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the heavy, dull fatigue of post-combat. Sailors on the Philippine Sea were walking the decks, collecting brass casings, sweeping up the debris of the chaff launchers. The ship smelled of cordite and burnt paint. Off the starboard bow, the last remnants of the Iranian fleet, the wreckage of the Macron, burped a final bubble of oil and air before settling onto the seabed 300 feet below. The USS Spruance signaled, "All survivors secured," transferring to Iranian Coast Guard vessel at the line. It was a mercy transfer. The U.S. Navy didn't want prisoners. They wanted the message sent back to Tehran by the survivors themselves. "Tell your generals what happened here," a U.S. Navy Master Chief told a captured Iranian officer as he was helped onto the transfer boat. "Tell them the truth?" The scorecard. The engagement had lasted exactly 42 minutes, from the first push at 2:51 p.m. to the final check fire at 3:33 p.m. The results were lopsided to the point of absurdity. Iranian losses: flagship, Iran's Macron, expeditionary sea base, sunk, torpedo strike. Patrol boats, 8 Bavar-class missile boats, destroyed. Fast attack. Craft, 28 Ashura-class speedboats, vaporized. Aircraft, 2 F-4, Phantom fighter jets, shot down. Drones, 10 Ababil 5, suicide drones, intercepted. Casualties. Estimated 450 plus KIA, mostly on the Macron, 120 wounded, 40 rescued by U.S. forces. Naval capability. The IRGCN's offensive swarm capability in the Strait was effectively wiped out for a decade. U.S. losses: USS Philippine Sea, scratched paint on the superstructure from machine gun fire, 1 broken coffee mug on the bridge during the hard turn. USS Spruance, 0 damage. USS Annapolis, sub, undetected. Aircraft, 0 losses. Casualties, 0 killed, 0 wounded. Ammunition expended, 2 Metco 48. Torpedoes, 16 standard missiles, 2 AMRAAMs, 4,000 rounds of 25mm, 20mm ammo. Total cost, approx 35 million value of Iranian assets. Destroyed approx 600 million plus the irreplaceable Makran. The aftermath and the truth. At 5:30 p.m., the propaganda war began. Tehran state media interrupted regular programming. They played patriotic music. A grim-faced announcer read a prepared statement. In a heroic confrontation in the Persian Gulf, the brave forces of the Islamic Revolution intercepted American aggressors who were violating our waters. The Americans fled in panic. We have inflicted heavy damage on their cruiser. Several of our boats achieved martyrdom. They showed shaky, blurry footage of the Philippine Sea turning, which was actually the ship maneuvering to unmask its guns. They claimed victory, but at 6 p.m., the Pentagon ended the debate. They didn't just issue a statement, they released the Sunkex reel. The optical sensors on the Philippine Sea, the gun camera footage from the helicopters, and the periscope footage from the Annapolis were declassified and uploaded to X, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. The world saw the truth in 4K resolution. They saw the Ashura boats disintegrating under chain gun fire. They saw the F-4s exploding in midair. And most terrifyingly, they saw the Makran, the massive sea base, break in half as the torpedo broke its back. The caption on the official U.S. Navy post was brutal in its simplicity. FAFO. Find out. The video went viral globally. 300 million views in 2 hours. In Tehran, the internet was throttled, but the video spread via VPNs. The population saw their military not as heroes, but as incompetent victims of their own arrogance. The great victory turned into a national embarrassment. General Salami was quietly removed from command 2 days later. The swarm doctrine was officially suspended for review. The lesson. The lesson learned that afternoon was written in fire, oil, and steel. For 20 years, Iran had relied on a specific theory of naval warfare, the swarm. They believed that quantity has a quality all its own. They believed that 100 cheap boats could overwhelm one expensive ship. They believed that the U.S. Navy was too big, too slow, and too polite to fight in the mud. At 2:51 p.m., they tested that theory. At 3:33 p.m., the theory was dead. They learned that a swarm against an Aegis cruiser is not a tactic. It is a target-rich environment. They learned that you cannot push a ship that tracks 200 targets at once. They learned that the U.S. Navy doesn't just have big ships. It has submarines that watch from below and stealth fighters that watch from above. The Strait of Hormuz is not a parking lot. It is not a parade ground for dictators. It is an international highway. And the USS Philippine Sea is the traffic cop. And if you try to run the roadblock, you don't get a ticket. You get a torpedo. Situation reversed. Mission accomplished. The watch continues. Watch.